Hello there, my name is Sixo, but more on that later, as it's time to hang out with Bumblebee. No, not that one. Not that one either. And definitely not that. Yes, I am of course talking about the one and only classic Generation 1 Bumblebee, who it's fair to say is about as cute as a button. Now he's been reimagined in super top-tier interactive form by the fine folks at Robosen Robotics, following on from their much nattered about Optimus Prime from not so long ago. Bumblebee is noticeably smaller and a little lighter on the features, but also boasts a significantly more palatable price tag as a result, though of course it's still not a sum to be sniffed at. As with Optimus though, I've found there's plenty to say about this release, including why it might potentially be more than meets the eye. As soon as you clap your eyes on this thing, it's hard not to think it's a very adorable and quite clearly cartoon-inspired take on the classic Autobot, looking every bit as you might remember him from the animation, albeit with a bit of additional stylized flair thrown in for good measure. Before even turning him on, everything looks and feels really premium, with the main body appearing solid and durable and the sculpt and presentation all looking clean, colourful and well done. It's not a product intended for display, but should you wish to do so, I think he'd look pretty good on a shelf somewhere. That's especially true because unlike Prime, B is able to stand fairly solidly without the aid of the servos being activated, meaning you can display him standing stoically if that's a thing that you really want to do. Equally, the limbs can be manipulated when the power is off, meaning you can theoretically pose Bumblebee with your hands in the more traditional manner should you wish, perhaps just with a note of caution to be careful he doesn't topple over. To get him activated though, it simply requires a press of the button behind his head, at which point the lights flick on and Bumblebee springs to life, declaring,
"Hiya, friend. Bumblebee here."
Now if you've seen Robosen's Optimus, you'll be familiar with how Bumblebee never truly stands still, swaying with a sense that he's almost breathing as the various servos kick into gear and keep everything activated. It's an aspect of the figure that takes a while to get used to, but also makes him seem more alive somehow. That's equally achieved by the gorgeous light-up elements present on the feet and head, with the eyes looking particularly spectacular. The face has come in for some critique online, but I think it looks really good myself, with a decent likeness for the vintage take on the character. I particularly like the hard-cut lines running down the cheeks from under his eyes, which feels highly reminiscent of the 80s design. Elsewhere, the sculpt is fairly smooth and absent of detail, with flat, unembellished surfaces over most of his limbs and the main body. It gives B a very simple anime-style feel, which works well, even if this aesthetic might be a little too cartoon-orientated for some tastes. If anything, there's not a lot here that lets you know this isn't a straight-up toy or statue of some kind, as any mechanical compromises are generally well hidden. From a front view, it's only really the hips that are a slight tell of more going on under the surface, whereas the back is also extraordinarily clean, with a very subtle speaker in B's classic spare tyre backpack and a charging port subtly tucked in just underneath. Clever stuff and neatly presented. Most of the movement comes from activating the features of course, but it's worth noting the hands can be manually twisted at the wrist and the thumbs can be adjusted a smidge too, should you wish. Otherwise the fingers are statically moulded shut with a fairly traditional hole left for plugging in B's blaster accessory. It's a snug fit that feels nicely secure once in place, and the good news is that you can leave it in hand without any fear of damaging the toy when activating most of the features, except when clearly indicated. Final thing to highlight on the design is the feet, where the wheels are actually separate pieces that can be freely moved in a bit of a neat touch. Equally surprising is the presence of rubber for the tyres, which feels like a length that Robosen really didn't need to go to, but it adds a little something in terms of attention to detail nonetheless. Overall, I really like the look of Robosen Bumblebee, even if it is quite a shift in aesthetic from their Optimus Prime. It's also noticeably out of scale with their more recent Elite release of the Autobot leader, although it fares a little better when stood next to the more sizable flagship release. Still, assuming you are either plush or lucky enough to get multiples of these things in your home at one time, I'm not sure scale is necessarily the top priority here, especially as we have plenty of Transformers merch that covers that concern off already. At the end of the day, it's all about the interactivity and gimmicks on offer, so let's get to it with the most exciting feature of all. Simply call out the character's name, "Hey Bumblebee,"
How's it going?
and then give the command to have him instantly turn into his iconic alternate form, Transform. 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 Transform.
Hey, my circuits are overheating. Aw, shucks.
Okay, confession time. Unlike Prime, this Robosen product does not transform at all. I've seen a fair bit of debate about this already online, but whilst it would of course have been nice to see, it's also sort of understandable why it wasn't included here, I think. After all, were we really expecting this thing to fold up into a realistic, licensed Volkswagen Beetle? Even if it were at all possible, just imagine what it would have done to the already fairly sizable price tag. I think considering this is clearly a somewhat more affordable effort from Robosen, it makes sense that the features have been pared down somewhat. That's also evident when you look at the specs of this guy versus the company's other output, with noticeably less microchips and servo motors involved here. And whilst yes, it's a shame to not see the transformation featured, there's still plenty to keep you interested, with numerous other voice commands ready to go. Hey Bumblebee.
How's it going?
Hello.
Hey, it's great to see you. What's your name? Cruisin' Cool. Hey, let's bust a move. Okie dokie. I was born battle ready.
All of these work well and should keep you entertained, much as they did with both me and my son, and indeed my wife, who happens to be a bit of a closet Bumblebee fan. Her verdict was much the same as mine. It would be amazing if this thing transformed, but even without that aspect, there's some really good stuff going on here all the same. It's also amazing to hear the unmistakable tones of original voice actor Dan Gilverson, who portrayed Bumblebee back in the 1980s Transformers cartoon. Ultimately though, it's once you download the accompanying app and start poking around that you really get under the skin of what Bumblebee can do, with lots more features and actions waiting to be unlocked. It all begins by connecting to Bumblebee via Bluetooth, at which point you're presented with a fairly straightforward menu. First up, there's a remote control function, which disables the voice commands in favour of activating Bumblebee in a more traditional manner. There's a responsive joystick which can have him walking backwards, forwards, or side to side. Interestingly, you can also adjust the walking speed in the menu too, making him pick up the pace quite considerably should you prefer. Also of intrigue is a little menu function called Automatic Standing, which, when ticked, basically means that B will always get himself up and back on his feet, even if he were to fall over, or, as in this case, if you try and lie him down. He just won't have it. Then the rest of the control menu is a series of pre-prepared actions, including the more obvious examples such as saying hello or firing his weapon. But also some more extreme examples, including testing his ability to stand on one leg and show off how stable he is. Look at him go.
Woohoo! Aw, shucks. All systems are go.
You can even press a designated button to perform an action at random should you desire.
Bumblebee reporting for duty.
Next up in the app is the Actions menu, which is fairly self-explanatory and includes various pre-programmed routines beyond what you may have been aware of by voice command alone.
Happy B-Day. Get it? B-Day? Ugh, Megatron. That guy's the worst. Ha! I was born battle ready. The Decepticons can eat my dust. When in doubt, I ask myself, what would Optimus Prime do? A Decepticon's worst nightmare. Watch out! It's Megatron! Prepare for battle! Let's kick it up a notch. Activating scanners for scout mode. The Decepticons are attacking! Ready to roll.
You can then download more actions by going to the appropriate menu and flicking through the list before making your choice, with some of these being even more impressive than you might imagine. Perhaps more interesting though is the action programming menu, which is where you're able to build your own custom sequences for Bee to undertake. First, the block-based menu is essentially a means of coding and involves creating your sequences using a drag and drop approach within the app itself. You can add a single action or create a repeated loop, after which you specify the joints you would like to move on the figure and add them to the sequence, all whilst the app visually confirms what it is you're about to control. Once that's done, you can specify the angle you would like that joint to move, and indeed the speed it should happen. You can then repeat this as many times over as you care for, ultimately building what can be a fairly extensive list of customized actions and loops. It's even possible to add in sounds and music as you go by visiting the relevant menu, where you'll find a whole library of pre-recorded voice samples for starters.
You know I'd never really leave ya. Time to get buzzing. Some of my best friends are human.
There's then a similar store of music files, although sadly this isn't a treasure trove of 80s Transformers cartoon themes, such as we found on Robosen Optimus Prime. Still, all told, there's plenty there to get you creating some surprisingly extensive actions, even if it does take a fair bit of practice, and obviously requires some caution around what you're asking the toy to actually do. Alternatively, you can enter the manual programming mode, which is maybe a little easier to get to grips with initially. This is where you physically manipulate the toy and save those movements in the app step by step as you go. Although before you begin, you'll need to unlock his joints first by specifying which bits you'd like to be able to move from the many options available, and then clicking on Confirm. Then you can move the toy as you see fit, before syncing that same action in the app, and then adding it as a step in the sequence before moving on. As long as you've unlocked the right joints, you can get really quite creative, and all in a way that might feel a touch more accessible than the block-based menu when starting out with this guy. Again, you can add in music and sounds to your sequence, and for even more fun, you can change and specify the exact colour of the headlights by adjusting the RGB levels for both individual feet. Once you've assembled your sequence, you can have it play over and over to your heart's content. I said as much during my review of Robosen's Optimus, but ultimately I feel like these customizable controls are the real meat on the bone as far as this release goes, and represent the biggest long-term source of engagement with the product, considering how much play and learning they offer. I also think they're fantastic tools for inspiring technically minded little ones at the right age. And who knows, the coding menu may even be the first step towards a bright future in programmable robotics someday. In my case, my boy is a little on the young side for that aspect just yet, but no matter, as he still has plenty of fun shouting random commands to keep Bee following his every whim. But wait, there's more, as the final bit of the app contains a mini theatre option, whereby you can either have Bumblebee play out an extended pre-programmed sequence all of his own, complete with sounds and music, or you can further pair him up with other Robosen Transformers and have them interact with one another. Once every robot is ready, you simply kick off the sequence and let them do their thing, making sure to clear plenty of space first.
Decepticons detected. Activating scanners for scout mode. The Decepticons are attacking! Prepare for battle! Autobots engage the enemy. Ha! I was born battle ready. Okie dokie.
Watching all this go on is truly bizarre, as it's almost like the classic cartoon has come to life right in front of you. In practice, it can be occasionally a little clunky, as the two of them have a slight habit of talking over one another, but still, it's great fun and truly impressive to watch. I can't deny I was sat there with a look of astonished glee the first time I witnessed it all, to say nothing of my son. All of which is to say that there's a lot to love about Robosen's take on Bumblebee, which feels like an altogether streamlined and more straightforward effort when compared to their Optimus Prime design. Yes, it may lack the ability to transform, which I appreciate will be a turn-off for some, but considering everything else it can do and the comparative price advantage removing that feature brings, I understand why Robosen have taken such an approach in this case. Besides, it's a slick and polished product with tons of amazing features, and feels like a truly worthy rendition of the classic iteration of the character as a result, meaning it couldn't be anything other than a very wholehearted toot. Now today's review is brought to you by TF Source, so I'll throw a link to their site in the video description below where you can check them out for all your Transformers and third-party needs. There are also links to both my Patreon and Redbubble, so be sure to take a look at those if you want to support me in exchange for some awesome perks and merch. Finally, I'd love it if you could drop me a like for today's video, please. And don't forget to let me know your thoughts on Robosen Bumblebee. Do you like what you see or not so sure? Otherwise, that's it from me, so thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day. TTFN.